Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, welcome everybody to this episode of the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management podcast at HR.com. And today we have a very interesting guest, someone that I've known for a long time, and we catch up every once in a while in the background. Her name is Anita Lettink, and she's a longtime thought leader and also an author in payroll. Welcome, Anita, to the podcast.
Hi, Brent. And hi, everyone who's listening.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we have a very interesting topic today. It's around AI and payroll. I think I'm not gonna steal your thunder here because I know you have some very provocative ideas around that. But maybe you could just share a little bit about yourself. What kind of gets you up in the morning and energized around the world of work and payroll?
Yeah. So I have a background as an engineer, and then as everyone in payroll, I happened to join an HR and payroll outsourcing company, and then completely switched my focus. And after close to 20 years working for that company, I decided it was time to go out on my own. And since then, I have been speaking about the future of work, advising companies on HR and payroll tech. And I've also authored 2 books. One is How to Select Your Next Payroll, and the other one is a book to help people with implementing pay transparency to be compliant with the EU directive.
Oh, that's fascinating, and this is really a good segue actually, because we were talking and here at the podcast, we're not a late night TV show, but we still have a green room where we talk about things before we actually go live with stuff.
Mhm.
And we did have a conversation a couple weeks back where you were saying that you think it's time to add a bona fide chapter around AI and payroll to your book, your latest book. Why is that? These are exciting times. Obviously, it's kind of a cliche, but it is. It's very exciting right now. Why is it the time now to add a chapter around AI and payroll?
So when I wrote my book 2 years ago, I included a chapter on innovation. And AI was a paragraph in that book, and I gave some examples of what you want to check for when you select a new vendor. But with all the progression that we have made in the past 2 years, I think it now warrants a chapter of its own. So I will take it out as a paragraph and I'm writing actually 2 chapters on the topic of AI and what that means for payroll.
Yeah, yeah. AI is just it's developing at a breakneck pace. It's even faster than some people think. And by the way, you always wonder whether some of that is just hype. But there is a lot of stuff that's kind of going on in the background, and it was just a couple of years ago. And by a couple of years ago, I mean no more than 24 months ago, when I was having a conversation with somebody in the field, and I was all excited about autonomous payroll, for instance, which is very much reliant on AI society. It actually, a light bulb went off in my head. I kind of was not getting what that meant, autonomous payroll. And I finally figured it out. I thought, oh, like the autonomous cars, like Google's autonomous cars, this sort of thing. Oh, payroll that runs itself. And then I got very excited about that. And I spoke with somebody who told me, you know what, that's definitely going to happen, but it's not next year. And that was true. And he said it's not the next thing, but it might be the next thing. It's eventually going to happen. and now I'm wondering whether it's coming a little bit faster. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the developments in the space that have led you to believe that payroll really that AI is really going to affect payroll sooner than we thought?
So, what I have been noticing is that there is a little bit of, I'm going to say, confusion between AI that we already use, algorithms that we applied, for instance, in recruitment, hiring, but also in payroll, and generative AI, which is relatively new. And that means that in payroll, you can apply both of these applications of AI. And because, let's say, the more traditional AI has been around for a while, we have been using that in payroll. And one of the examples that I can give you there is anomaly detection, for instance, where as you progress, as payroll runs, it starts to understand, because you teach it, what is correct and what is incorrect. And when something is incorrect, it can flag it, bring it up to you, ask you how to solve it. But then in a second and a third and a fourth iteration, it learns how you solve that error. And then it can also suggest how you should resolve this error if it comes up in future. And over time, it probably can take care of the error by itself, because it has seen you done that 10 times, and now it knows how this particular error is always resolved. So in essence, it learns as you go. With generative AI, the focus is slightly different, because every time that you hear Gen AI, the main word here is generative. It creates something new. And that means that you can use it, for instance, to provide answers to questions that people have. It generates an answer based on a knowledge base that it has. And in this case, you should not think about these vast LLMs that underpin an OpenAI or Perplexity. This is about much smaller knowledge bases that are only defined by the policies that you have, maybe the legislation that applies or collective labor agreements. And based on that very small subset of information, it can provide answers to the people that work for you. And therefore, it can, for instance, explain the numbers on a payslip. And some of the examples that I have shared recently are really around, okay, explain this payslip to me. How does it differ from last month? What are all these deductions that I see on my payslip? What does that mean? Why are they there? And then what you see is it actually provides a business case, because it takes away time, or it saves time for payroll administrators who would usually answer these questions.
That's interesting because it's an enhancement of ESS in a way, right?
Yes,
It,
yes.
yeah, it makes ESS even more streamlined and dynamic and responsive, which is huge for employee retention, honestly, and engagement, which is really interesting. And that gets into um, let's put a pin in what I'm about to say because I want to get back to the efficiency stuff. That gets into the idea that of making payroll an employee engagement tool, which we've heard about more prominently, I'd say, in the past 4 years. It's sort of risen to a certain level of awareness. There's some companies that sort of put that message out first almost, and they're basically payroll companies, which is interesting. So that's something. Let's get back to that in a minute. But going back to the operational efficiencies, um, way back in the day, I used to work as an industry analyst, and we would look at deployments of HCM, and we included payroll under the aegis of HCM. Sometimes it falls under finance, but for the deployments we were looking at, because I was leading HCM technology, payroll was part of the HCM solution, and there were always lots of newfound efficiencies and therefore productivity gains, which contributed to the ROI of those deployments that came from the elimination of errors in payroll, right? And a lot of those errors, automation did wonders, and we're sort of past the first age of automation, if you will, right? That's people are small companies that are still solving for HCM are just learning about it, right? But in terms of the macro, we're beyond that. But AI has actually expanded our concept of what automation can be, and what efficiency and where newfound efficiencies can, not to be redundant, found, right? And so it's really interesting that without automation, the old style, call it old style or conventional, traditional automation, you'll find a lot of productivity gains from that and newfound efficiencies. But AI is expanding that sort of it's expanding the possibilities in that area.
Yeah, what I always say is that when you look at payroll, a lot can be achieved by robotic process automation. And as long as there's still room to apply RPA and create workflows, make your payroll process more efficient, I would say do that first. And then once you have fully exploited that capability, add AI, whether the traditional one or generative AI, but really think in building blocks to get to a payroll that can be run as efficiently as possible. Because some people now seem to think that you can do everything with AI, and a fully automated payroll is fully powered by AI. But I think that for the time being, we also need to keep in the back of our minds that what we can do with RPA, we should do with RPA, because it is a good technology to help you become more efficient.
And you know what, that might be a topic for another podcast, is the difference between RPA and AI, because I know there's a lot of it just can and ML, machine learning for that matter as well. I think even the experts struggle to understand the difference between ML and AI, to be honest with you. They know a lot more about it than I do. But what's interesting is if we could go back to the employee engagement piece of it. By the way, the name of your book is?
How to select your next payroll.
That's right. Okay. And AI is going to be part of that selection process in the future. Now, the employee engagement piece of it. Um, let's talk a little. So let's just take a little bit of a tangent here, if we could, right? And I'd like to get into strategic payroll as well, and maybe and then kind of circle back and how AI helps with all of that. We've touched on it with the generative AI, but what does it mean for payroll to be an employee engagement tool?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things that people sometimes forget is that as long as payroll is okay, you can build from an HR perspective on top of that. But as soon as something goes wrong with payroll, the attention of employees or the appreciation of employees for other HR processes goes out the window, because fix my payslip first, make sure that I have money in the bank, and then we can talk about performance appraisals and everything else. But money comes first. And I ran a payroll service center in the past. And I did that for a couple of years. And it was only after I left that I started to think about the connection. Because if you run payroll, you really think about payday as your main event. And then afterwards, you do reporting and how you send your files to the banks and general ledger, you do all that, and then a new pay period starts. But the process actually now moves to the employee. And I think when you start to look at that process more holistically, it adds something to your understanding of what is going on. So your process does not end the moment that you send the files to the bank. Your process is actually the input for something else at the employee side. And that connection is super important, because if something happens there, then you immediately put your employee relationship and your employee satisfaction in danger. The other thing is that during the pandemic, it became much more normal to talk about other aspects of the employee relationship, think mental health. And what we have seen grow from there is that employees are now also more willing to discuss financial health and to ask for help managing their finances. And I always remind people that when young kids do not learn how to manage their money at home, then there's no place else where they will learn that. And therefore, when the employer starts to provide financial assistance in whatever form, that is highly appreciated these days. Just to help people manage their money, not what they do with it, to provide them tools and processes and maybe courses, training to how to best manage the money that they earn. Therefore, I think these types of tools, like I mentioned with generative AI, are much more helpful to provide insights to employees into actually how does their paycheck, how is their paycheck produced, what goes into there, what does it consist of, but also if they want to earn a little bit more money, how could they do that? And there you have examples like AI, so them asking the AI, how can I pick up a little bit more money? And AI telling them, well, if you work this shift next week or today or tonight, then that will give you another $100. So why don't you do that? Um, there is so much opportunity here to help people understand where that money comes from and how they can earn a little extra, that I think it will contribute to employee satisfaction on this pay side.
I think I think you're right. You bring up a lot of good points. There's a lot of more engagement or interactivity between the workforce and the employer in terms of their payroll. So it's kind of with accounts payables, right? If you're
Mhm.
there's sort of this curtain, and it's there's they have their process, and if you're a contractor, a seller to the organization, right? There's sort of a process that the organization has, the customer has, and there's not too much visibility into that. And I see a parallel there and it can cause frustrations, right? There's a lot of a parallel with that with the workforce and their payroll. There should not be a curtain or an imaginary partition that keeps the workforce's prying eyes away from payroll. Obviously, there's sort of the nuts and bolts of it that you don't that you have to do, that you don't necessarily want them looking at everything, and that could be a little bit weird, maybe, right? But to have some more interactivity, engagement there would be interesting. A lot of the vendors in the space, UKG, iSolved, and others. There are others that they've come out with their own research, and each has sort of a different percentage. And I'm not going to remember all the percentages, but they all essentially are in the high range. They corroborate each other in a way. You have just one mistake in your payroll, and your people are going to start looking for a job elsewhere. Just one, so they'll tolerate So they'll tolerate no mistakes, basically. You have no room for error. And it's really interesting with payroll. Um, I like to tell I like to tell this joke because it really kind of helps to lay bare what the issue is. Nobody wakes up in the morning, turns on the light switch, the light turns on, and they say, "Oh, call up the power company, say, hey, thanks for thanks for sending me my electricity this morning. It worked." Right? It's the same thing with payroll. Nobody calls up payroll and says, "Good job on the workforce. You got my paycheck right this week." It's just a perfunctory thing. It's to be expected. It's probably the most to be expected thing that an employee expects, right? But you have one problem with it, and you immediately have an existential, acute employee engagement, employee retention crisis on your hands. And so it's very, very important to get it correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you from running payrolls for other companies. You know that the only outcome that is acceptable is the correct and timely pay slip. And that means that you have to score 100% on both of these criteria. Um, and if you don't, either the payment is wrong or it's too late, then you start receiving phone calls and complaints from people. So, yes, at times it's a very ungrateful job, but I also think it's a very interesting job because of all the complexities, working under pressure and making sure that people get paid. And it's super satisfactory if you know that at the end of the pay period, everyone receives money and therefore can afford the cost of living.
That is a very satisfying end goal, and with AI, we're able to mitigate that risk even further. The risk of employer attrition, of a big ding to your employer culture, and all this kind of stuff. You can get even more efficient with your payroll, so you can focus on higher level things. It's a very, very exciting time to be in payroll. We're on the very cusp of the next sort of revolution in technology, I think, when it comes to payroll. And Anita, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.